Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Cruise Conversations, and we're continuing our Meet the Innovators series with a good friend of the show and one of our founding members of CSI Plus. It's Matthew Jensen from Fraiserline. Hello.
Hi Toby.
How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Good to be here and thanks for having me on the show.
No problem at all. So we'll dive straight in. The purpose of these series are to highlight some of the innovations and some of the really important products that are being launched into the cruise industry. So we've invited you onto the show to talk about what it is your business does for the cruise line. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and what it is that Fraiserline do?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start off a little bit about myself. I mean, I actually started in originally quantity surveying within the heavy industries of petrochemical. So I came from a very civils-based background, quite technical. I then moved into architecture. So I'm trained in architecture and set up Fraiserline, which is a multidisciplinary design, surveying and architectural consultancy. And yeah, so it's never looked back since.
Perfect. So for our audience at home, going to be made up of designers, architects, people involved in refurbishment, new build, shipyards. Yeah. We're here to talk about technology. We're here to talk about innovation within the cruise sector. What is it that your company can do for our audience that isn't typically being done at the moment?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, what I think during this funny time at the moment, what we've realized is that the important thing that seems to be the underlying current within the cruise, but marine industry as a whole, is technology, and how technology can embrace much more results for both the stakeholders in the community of cruising is a great example. So we've slightly broadened our offering, our MVP as a business, to look at digitalization of assets that can both be beneficial for the long term of the asset as well as the refit, new build, and obviously our knowledge of the cruise industry. So
yeah, so I'm hearing the words reality capture from you guys. And for those of you at home that watch our program, there's lots of you out there. We sat down with the guys at Regolo Studio and YSA Design and talked about how the future of design needs to incorporate more technology. And your company offers something called reality capture, which for those, would you like to explain that to those at home that don't know what that is?
Of course, yeah, no problem at all, Toby. I mean, really, it fits very nicely with your last webinar. I mean, we're probably taking the definition of reality capture is taking that back to the information capture. You mentioned on your last webinar about the problems, for instance, when you're introduced to a new ship, a design project, you haven't got that information, you haven't got the plans of the ship, you're having to sort of find around, you're potentially given a fire plan which isn't to scale. Basically, reality capture is getting that information in order to undertake the design process, and it's basically capturing the comprehensive data set. For instance, with interiors, it's an ideal example.
So talk us through the actual process. A brand would approach you guys and say, we're planning on refurbishing this part of the ship. We want you to save us time, money, effort, all of this stuff. You come in and what do you do? What is the actual product?
Of course. Well, I've got one here, an example. So we work with scanners, which are, this isn't an exact one, but it's just a similar version to that product. Now, what we would do is either a design company or the operator, the actual or fleet management company, it depends on whoever is looking after the asset. We sometimes have maintenance teams as well approach. Will say to us, right, we want a scan of our restaurants on board, example. We're looking to refit that restaurant. We want a scan to see what we've got existing. We can determine then the condition of that restaurant. We can determine whether there's a piece of structure in that restaurant. So that the whole team can start to, from a desktop, without having to keep going on board the ship, start to provide feasibility on what they need to do, the condition, and then it's a case of having to take on board a scanner and scan the environment. It all depends on what that particular requirement is. If it's lots of different things in the way, with regards to trying to achieve that design, scanning is probably the best way of trying to get that data to desktop.
So historically, if they were going to look at refurbishing that part of the ship or the entire ship, they would send a team on to count furniture, look at the condition of certain spaces. All of this stuff takes a lot of time, right? So what you're proposing has huge cost-saving implications, right?
Absolutely, and that's probably the most valid point. Is I've been used to going on board for weeks at a time, counting chairs, light fittings. looking at the condition of different ships and reporting back with different reports, inventories, audits, markup drawings. These things take an awful lot of time, huge investment for both operators and design teams. Now, by putting a scanning sensor on board and capturing that whole environment in one go, it can then save that time of being on board. It can be done from a desktop, and it's much more time, and it can be referenced from any part of the design team. That's a good thing, without having to each member having to keep going back on board, find out where the ship is. So it's a huge time, cost, and logistical saving as well.
And that document, that file that you then produce as the final piece, that can then be shared with design studio, outfitter, shipyard, meaning that you don't have to have 3 or 4 different companies all doing that same survey, right?
Absolutely not. No. So what exactly? I mean, so once we capture we undertake a scan, we're provided with a 3D point cloud. It's called. It's basically a 3D representation of the ship or that interior, and that can go to anyone in the design team. It's very good, for instance, to present. So, for instance, if you're bringing in new consultants or you're introducing problems to the client, you're saying, well, actually, we've determined there's rust on board, for instance.
Yeah.
You can share that point cloud and actually get them to see it for themselves. I mean, they're basically having a window in the ship without having to go there, and it really is breakthrough for that means as well.
And you're talking here very much from a refurbishment point of view or an existing asset point of view. How can this be used within the new build sector? What are some of the cases that you guys would see from a new build point of view?
Yeah, very good question, Toby. I mean, I think from a new build, it's a slightly different format. I'd probably correlate this back to how it's used in construction, for instance, where it can be taken to a shipyard and it can be used to capture regular intervals of the new build progress. So, for instance, when the ship's being built and there's more meat being added to the bone, you can essentially monitor the progress. It's also used for clash detection as well. So you can overlay the 3D model with the point cloud that's scanned to see the tolerance of how far the ship is out, whether it's built correctly, for instance. So it's a very good risk analysis process as well. We've had inquiries where they want scanning for sake of due diligence to make sure that the shipyard's building it correctly.
Wow. And talk to me from the big topic at the moment, as you'll know, is sustainability. About reducing carbon footprints, making sure that we're not wasting materials, we're not wasting time, money, all of that stuff. How does this product benefit the cruise line or the owner of the asset?
Yeah,
from a sustainability point of view, of course.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually had an operator come to us and say that part of their internal brief is to reduce the amount of surveyors and also specialist teams on board, because that's taking up cabins on board. It's also taking up what I call obviously return on investment real estate of the ship. So, for instance, cabins that are occupied by maintenance teams are not being offered to guests that spend money. So they've said, what can we do? What can technology do to help us reduce the overhead of having people on board for 2 weeks at a time that are using up our occupancy? And, so the scanners, obviously, we could probably get on board and say, for instance, let's just say it's a lobby or a restaurant, or it could probably be done within a series of days. We'd need to come straight back off again. We wouldn't need to be back on there for 2 weeks, unless probably we're doing a huge scan, which might take a little bit longer.
Yeah, and from the point of view of time it takes in order to get that final document. So for those at home that are thinking, oh, this could be of interest to us, we've got X number in our fleet, we're actually looking to get them back into operation soon. What from start to finish, what are we talking about here? If you're taking, let's say, a restaurant, what's the time frame in order to get that document from you guys?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, let's just say a typical restaurant on an Independence class ship, sort of 3,000 pax ship. We would probably need maybe 2 days on board to fully comprehend. It's all about how the more time you spend with scanning, the better quality of the data, the granularity of data. Because what it is, it's little points. If you do a very quick scan, you're going to have very, very low granularity of data. If you take time and do it properly, there is a bit of an art to it. And it's about setting up the scans in different stations, and then obviously the unit itself can actually capture that environment quite comprehensively. So, for instance, a typical restaurant could take up to 2 days. We then need some time after we come back off the ship to process and clean up that data. We would then present that to the end user.
And then that document, that file would then be in the ownership of the brand. So they would have that as a reference point for future, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is incrementally over time, if every brand undertakes scanning of all their fleets, they are going to have pretty much a whole
Right. Yeah.
a whole audit trail of their ships, which is going to be great because they won't need to have to keep going on board if find out, have to travel abroad to see the ship. They can actually do that on a desktop means, and they can find out within 2 years what's happened to that ship, what upgrades have happened. And for maintenance teams, it would allow for this thing called predictive maintenance as well, which means that maintenance teams can be much more on board with how they can carry out refits and replenishment on a much better, tighter program, rather than having to keep going around the ship and with a tick box checking that out.
One of the things that we hear when I speak to different designers is that they may have installed carpet a year ago and they've got to then go back on board to survey it to see how it looks, to whether they replace it or not. Not only are you wasting time, effort, and money and potentially ripping out carpet that doesn't need to be replaced, you've got that archived content that you can actually look back and see the condition of that product.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it. It is good enough that, and I think as time goes on, the quality of the technology is going to get even better. I mean, I've noticed even in a year that the quality is getting better, and we can actually see really intricate detail. And I mean, the accuracy of the scanner is 8mm tolerance up to 20 meters. So it's quite good in terms of accuracy. You could measure that carpet. You could probably zoom in and see the wear on it, and if you can do that over a series of months subsequent to a refit, you're going to be in a good place as an operator.
And I suppose looking at this, in terms of doing the scan, it would make sense for the ship to be docked or it would be still. But can you get on board and do this if it's not at a shipyard or it's not somewhere else? I mean, is it possible to do it if the ocean's calm?
Yeah, that's a very, very critical question in terms of the format and the context in which we scan. So we've just undertaken some trials, for instance, on a small vessel, and we did that deliberately. We did it with a very small fleet deliberately, so that we could test the tolerance against the weather, the movement, for instance, interference of engine generators running and things like that. Now, ideally, we need to be in an environment where the ship is potentially docked or is it's not in a storm, for instance. I mean, so that the whole thing's not swaying around, because that can affect the scan data quality. Yeah. And we're not quite sure that we can promise that that's going to be absolutely brilliant quality data if we're moving. So older vessels that have vibration, we just have to be mindful that can interfere. Yeah. But we have done enough testing to make sure that the majority of things are because you can go on board a large vessel now and it's almost like being in a building. We're pretty good with that.
Yeah, and I suppose the other benefit there is that if the ship comes to a port, passengers get off, you guys could actually go on. Yeah. And get a lot of that work done while the passengers are off the ship.
Yeah, definitely, Toby. I mean, it's in terms of the actual execution of scanning, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, all we need to do is we just need to be given what we need, what the brief on what we need scanning, and then it's a case of literally just setting up. There'll be a team that will scan, and then we just literally capture, and then we're off, and then we process the data and deliver.
Yeah. So one of my final questions is, one of the things that Anna Marie said from YSA Design on the last session is that how designers need to be really researching and adopting these types of technologies. Is this one of those technologies that needs to be in the arsenal of a designer or a cruise brand?
Absolutely. I'm going to say that because I guess I'm a bit of a technology evangelist. I've always tried to see what's ahead to improve the design industry. But I think what was said on the last webinar, which was talking about BIM and 3D systems, to make sure your choice of software platform is correct, it depends on which method of information you're putting into it, for instance. So if you're working with 2D plans that have been given from a surveyor, then it might be worth sticking to AutoCAD and very 2D old school methods. If you're working with laser scanning, that kind of works hand in hand with things like BIM and 3D design software, because you're working in that same format. You're thinking in 3D. It's your mind's in that way, and you deliver in that sense. So I've always been a believer that it starts off very early on about how you get the data, how you're given that data, if it's a surveyor or whether you're using this technology, that will determine what software you use and what. But I think really the industry does need this push for working in the same way, so that we're all coordinating in the same manner, and we're all, you know, we can, for instance, if we want to work with different consultants, we're all in the same place. We're not having to then think, oh, they don't work in the same way. We've then got to introduce them into our system, and it's training and time and cost. So I think, yeah, it's a very important thing, and I'm hoping that it's all going to be going upwards.
It sounds like it is. I mean, the talk that I hear is that people are now more willing to adopt these types of technologies, whether that's because of COVID and everyone's had a chance to, you know, think about what the future is for our industry. The final thing I want to ask you then is, you've got a captive audience here of designers, architects, people involved in the industries that you serve. What's your message to this industry? What do you want to say to them if they're listening now?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, definitely consider using emerging technologies when it comes to design. And I know we've all been there, where we think, oh, we'll try it on the next project. We'll try on the next project, or we, you know, I would say really give these systems a go. And I'd like to think that is going to be adding value to your proposition to your client. It's going to be making sure that your checks and your quality of design is better. And I think it is a case of having to really embrace technology for the sake of better design. And I know there are some very fabulously talented designers in CSI. I mean, there are some fabulous ones. And I think that once you work the two in hand, I think we're going to see some fantastic ships out there in the future.
Wow. Excellent. Well, look, you've put it so well. Thank you so much for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to include your contact information in the comments below, or somewhere that the users or the viewers can see. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next CSI event.
I look forward to seeing you guys too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Take care, guys. Until next time.
Cheers. Bye-bye.